Your spoon makes soft clicks against the synthetic ceramic. The nutrient paste today is green, though nobody remembers what green used to mean. The flavor scientists say they've recreated summer, but none of them have ever seen it. You've read that summer was a kind of light that made things grow without effort. The dining cubicle hums with the eternal machinery sounds, the background radiation of human survival. Somewhere, miles below, the geothermal taps drone on, drinking heat from the earth's remaining warmth. Your great-grandmother used to tell stories about her great-grandmother, who remembered the last day of sun. Now sun is just another word in the archive, like beach or wind. The worms need tending. They're the size of ancient trains now, another archive word, bred large in the centuries of darkness to process more biomatter. Their bodies hold the genetic memory of surface dirt. Sometimes they writhe in patterns that the biologists say mirror old growth patterns of surface vegetation. The wall-mounted chronometer blinks its red numbers steadily. Time feels different down here, measured only by shifts and cycles, the steady rhythm of maintenance tasks and meal periods. The deep sensors show the temperature outside the bunker walls, minus 270 degrees Celsius, almost absolute zero. The paste tastes like algae and synthetic proteins. All food does now. Each bite contains recycled molecules that have passed through the great processing vats, broken down and rebuilt endless times. The nutritionists say it's perfectly calibrated, but sometimes you wonder if the calibration is for bodies that don't exist anymore. A message flickers across your retinal implant. Sector 7 experiencing maintenance issues. Please avoid Tunnel System C during repairs. The support beams have been settling lately. Yesterday, an entire hydroponics level had to be evacuated when the ceiling started shedding concrete dust. The plants didn't mind. They've been engineered to thrive in any conditions. You put on your work uniform, thick fabric woven from engineered fungal fibers and bacterial cellulose. The material is designed to protect against the cold that seeps through the bunker walls, always trying to reach in with its frozen fingers. Your boots are heavy-duty, industrial rubber, the soles thick enough to protect against the caustic compounds the worms produce. The corridor outside your pod stretches into darkness. The architects installed strips of LED lighting to mark the paths, but they're always dim. Power conservation is eternal law down here. Some of the younger generation have developed an almost sonar-like sense of their surroundings, clicking their tongues to navigate the darker sections. A group of archivists passes by, recording the day's technical readings into the historical database. They believe every temperature change, every minor fluctuation in the geothermal taps might be significant to future generations. Their uniforms are marked with strings of numbers, each one representing a year since the freeze. You check your worm tending schedule on a standard issue tablet. The screen flickers with age. Electronics don't last long in the perpetual humidity of the lower levels. But it shows what you need. Sector 12, Sublevel 8, Worm Complex C. The largest specimens live there, processing the bunker's organic waste into usable biomass. The nutrient paste settles in your stomach like a stone. Your body processes it efficiently. It has to. 10 generations of darkness have left their mark on human digestion. Your eyes have adapted to perpetual artificial light. Your skin has grown pale as cave fish. Your bones have weakened despite the calcium supplements. The worms are waiting. You can feel their vibrations through the soles of your boots, a deep pulse that reverberates through the bunker's foundations. They've grown enormous over the centuries of selective breeding, these blind engineers of humanity's waste processing system. In the pocket of your uniform, you carry a small jar of real dirt, actual surface soil, passed down through your family. It's contraband, technically. The Resource Council says all organic matter must be processed through the recycling systems. But you keep it anyway, this tiny sample of a world your ancestors walked on. Sometimes, late in your sleep cycle, you open the jar and breathe in the scent of a vanished world. The overhead lights follow their programmed pattern, brightening slightly to mimic what the archive says was daybreak. It's time to join the worm-tending shift, to descend even deeper into the concrete maze of human survival. You leave your pod, your boots heavy against floors, stained with mineral deposits, ready to begin another day in humanity's last refuge. The last spoonful of paste watches you from the bowl, green as the ancient forests no one remembers. You swallow it and stand, your body moving through air that has been filtered and refiltered, scrubbed of contaminants but never touching wind. It's time to tend the worms, those blind inheritors of humanity's waste. Their movements echo through the bunker structure, a reminder that even here, life continues. Another day in the long dark begins. The worm complex smells like deep earth and ammonia. Hydroponic light bleeds through cracks in the tunnel walls where protein-rich moss grows in fractal patterns. 3 generations ago, someone calculated that the moss had spelled out the word sky in Braille, but no one could verify. No one reads Braille anymore. Children in the education pods learn to count using segments of worms. 1 segment, 2 segments, 3 segments, infinity. They've never seen numbers written in anything but bacterial displays and biometric readouts. Some of them believe mathematics is a kind of fungus. The old maintenance chief keeps a collection of broken machines. This one, he says, pointing to a rusted heap, still remembers what it was like to pump air from the surface. The machines speak to each other in clicks and whirs when the power cycle's down. They reminisce about pressure changes and wind resistance. Sector 9 has developed its own dialect. They speak in rhythms that match the pulsing of the geothermal taps. Consonants click like cooling pipes. Vowels hum like ventilation shafts. Last week, a linguist concluded that their children's first words are always the names of minerals. The protein vats have started producing unauthorized colours. Purple Wednesday's batch came out in a shade that made people remember things they'd never experienced. The technicians blamed it on a mutation in the algae culture, but others say the vats are trying to recreate the aurora borealis they've never seen. In the deepest tunnels, where the pressure makes ears pop and teeth ache, there are mushrooms that grew into the shape of city skylines. No one planted them. No one admits to having spores from surface specimens. Yet there they are, concrete grey caps, rising like tiny metropolises from the mineral-rich soil. The recycling processor in Block C developed a philosophy. It sorts materials not by composition, but by how much history they contain. Plastic from the surface age goes one way. Third-generation synthetic polymers go another. It refuses to process anything that can't prove its lineage. Some people collect sounds. They keep them in sealed containers. The hiss of the first geothermal tap, the echo of footsteps in newly carved tunnels, the wheeze of ancient ventilation fans. These audio archivists say they're preserving the bunker's accent for future anthropologists. The youngest generation has developed an extra eyelid, translucent like cave fish. The medical staff claim it's convergent evolution, an adaptation to the perpetual moisture and artificial light. But sometimes, in the right angle of illumination, you can see tiny bioluminescent dots across these membranes, mapping constellations that never existed. Abandoned tunnels fill with crystalline formations that grow in impossible geometries. The minerals ignore standard crystal structures, instead forming shapes that resemble extinct alphabets. Geologists have started recording these formations as a new form of literature. The worms process everything: waste, dead matter, obsolete machinery, worn-out clothing. They even processed an entire library once, when the digital archives needed more server space. Now sometimes their castings contain words, perfectly formed letters of compressed soil, spelling out fragments of lost books. Temperature regulation units develop personalities after decades of use. The one in Section 7B thinks it's a meteorologist, constantly predicting weather patterns for a surface that no longer exists. Its forecasts come out in binary, long strings of ones and zeros that translate to descriptions of impossible climates. The hydroponics labs have produced a strain of vine that grows in accordance with prime numbers. It refuses to branch at any interval that isn't mathematically pure. The botanists have tried to explain basic multiplication to it, but it remains stubbornly Euclidean. In the oldest sections of the bunker, the walls have absorbed so much human presence that they've started to exhibit signs of memory. Touch them, and your fingers tingle with electromagnetic recordings of conversations held centuries ago. The maintenance crews have to wear insulated gloves to avoid information overload. The worm you're supposed to be tending has grown still, its segments arranged in a perfect logarithmic spiral. The biologists say this is normal behavior, but you've noticed it only happens during what used to be lunar eclipses. 10 generations underground, and still some rhythms persist. The primary support columns are 4 meters thick, reinforced with carbon fiber mesh and stress-sensing bacteria that change color under dangerous loads. They rise from bedrock, disappearing into darkness above. Each one is labeled with depth markers that read like maritime navigation charts, measuring distance not from sea level, but from the frozen surface 2 miles up. Maintenance tunnels run between the main corridors like capillaries, barely wide enough for one person. Their walls are lined with transparent polymer conduits carrying different fluids, nutrients in green, waste in brown, coolant in blue. The pipes pulse with peristaltic pumps, the whole system a visible circulatory diagram of the bunker's metabolism. The residential pods are arranged in honeycomb patterns, optimizing space and structural integrity. Each hexagonal cell connects to 6 others through soundproofed corridors. The walls are smart material composites that adjust their thickness based on surrounding pressure, breathing with the Earth's subtle shifts. In the server farms, machines from different centuries run simultaneously. Quantum computers hum alongside ancient silicon processors, each maintaining vital systems. The older machines run on physical switches and magnetic tape. They survived the great electromagnetic surge that came with the final sunset. New computers grow in vats, crystal matrices forming in nutrient solutions, building processors from living semiconductor lattices. The hydroponics levels feature ceilings that function as enormous light panels, their surface covered in engineered bioluminescent algae. The light they produce mimics the spectrum of the lost sun, or what the archives say the spectrum should be. The panels require constant cultivation. Specially trained technicians crawl across them in magnetic boots, tending to dark patches where the algae colonies have died off. Vertical transit happens through pneumatic tubes large enough for human passage. They operate on atmospheric pressure differentials, controlled by massive pumps that live in their own sub-basement level. The tube walls are transparent in sections, offering glimpses of other layers of the bunker as you pass. Mushroom farms, waste processing plants, geothermal tap stations. The geothermal tap room is a cathedral of pipes and pressure gauges. Here, superheated steam from Earth's core feeds ancient turbines that still spin on their original bearings. The maintenance logs for these machines stretch back to the first dark years. Each engineer adds their observations in different inks, different handwritings, a paleography of human survival. Water recycling happens in vast cylindrical tanks that stretch up through multiple levels. They're wrapped in spiral staircases and monitoring platforms. The liquid inside glows with bioluminescent purification bacteria. Different species handle different contaminants, creating bands of color: green for organic waste, blue for heavy metals, purple for synthetic compounds. The oldest tunnels weren't planned. You can tell by their organic curves, the way they follow the path of least resistance through the rock. Newer sections are perfectly geometric, carved by boring machines, guided by AI optimizers. The contrast between old and new creates strange acoustics. Sound travels differently through the curved tunnels, sometimes arriving before its source. Climate control happens at the smallest scale. Each section, each room, each corridor has its own independent system. The technology varies by age and availability. Some use electronic sensors and mechanical vents. Others rely on engineered bacteria colonies that respond to temperature changes by producing or absorbing heat. The newest systems use quantum entanglement to transfer thermal energy between distant points. The waste processing centers are architectural marvels of flow dynamics. Everything moves downward through gravity-fed channels, through different levels of filtration and decomposition. The worms occupy the lowest levels, their massive bodies extending through channels in the bedrock. The heat of their movement and digestion supplements the geothermal power. Communication relies on a hybrid network. Fiber optic cables run alongside cultures of neurons, grown in continuous strands through transparent tubes. The biological components can repair themselves, but are slower. The electronic parts are faster, but require constant maintenance. Messages take both paths simultaneously, arriving as complementary data streams that must be reconciled by translation computers. The main archives occupy a sphere of interlocking titanium shells, each layer rotating independently to maintain gyroscopic stability. Inside, data storage takes every possible form: crystalline matrices, biological memory systems, traditional digital drives, and actual paper documents in climate-controlled chambers. The sphere never stops moving, its constant motion powering the cooling systems that keep the archives functional. Emergency bulkheads segment the entire structure into containment zones. Each one is thick enough to withstand the pressure of the entire frozen ocean above, should the upper levels ever breach. Their surfaces are marked with navigation codes in every known notation system, from binary to Braille, to the new tactile language developed by the tunnel maintenance crews. The cafeteria level is a maze of transparent partitions and recycled alloy tables. The walls are covered in hydroponic moss that helps regulate oxygen levels and provides ambient lighting in shades of blue-green. The moss has grown in patterns that some say resemble city maps, though no one can agree which city. Today's lunch is protein cubes tinted orange to suggest carrots that no one remembers, algae soup with synthetic salt, and something the dispensary calls historical recreation, tuna fish. The flavor technicians are particularly proud of this one. They claim to have decoded the genetic memory of ocean taste from preserved fish DNA. Maria from Sector 7 wears a jacket made from mycelium leather, cultured in the fashion labs below the agricultural level. The material shifts color based on proximity to heat sources, rippling between deep purple and copper. It's the latest trend, bioresponsive clothing that participates in your environment. Her boots are classic recycled rubber, but she's added bioluminescent strips that pulse with her walking rhythm. The council's talking about expanding down again, says Chen, his uniform still stained with worm sign. They found another cavern system below level 90. The debate spreads across 3 tables. Some argue we're already stretched too thin. Others say we need the space for the growing population. Someone mentions the old stories about other bunkers, the possibility of horizontal expansion, of contact. The nutrient paste dispenser malfunctions, creating abstract patterns in everyone's soup. The maintenance crew calls it art and takes pictures for the cultural archive. Someone starts a discussion about whether machine errors can be considered a valid form of artistic expression. The latest entertainment download from the Central Archives plays on wall screens. Historical reconstruction series, Beach Holiday. The actors move through computer-generated sunshine, but they got the shadows wrong. No one seems to mind. The show's popularity has sparked a fashion trend of loose-fitting beachwear made from recycled thermal blankets. Talk turns to the new synthetic music coming from level 42. They're composing with machinery sounds now, the rhythm of waste processors, the harmonic resonance of the geothermal taps, the deep subsonic pulses of the great worms. Critics call it authentic bunker culture. Traditionalists prefer the classical recordings of wind and waves. The younger workers wear their hair in complex braids that mimic the patterns of efficient space utilization, fractal spirals and hexagonal matrices. Some have started implanting small bioluminescent nodes in their skin, creating constellations of light that tell stories in Morse code. The older generation calls it disrespectful to surface memories. The youth call it evolution. My grandmother swears she remembers real vegetables, says someone from the hydroponics team. Not the engineered ones, but the kind that grew in dirt. This sparks a debate about genetic memory, about whether cells can carry the echo of sunlight through generations of darkness. The protein cubes taste like the idea of carrots rather than carrots themselves. The taste engineers explain that they're working from archived flavor profiles, molecular structures reconstructed from old data. Some say they prefer these interpretations to the historical accuracy attempts. At least these taste like something new, something that belongs to the now. Politics dominates one corner where the maintenance chiefs gather. There's talk about resource allocation, about the balance between expanding down and maintaining what we have. Someone mentions the recent election for level representative. The candidate who promised to increase the chocolate ration won, even though everyone knows chocolate is just recycled protein with brown colouring. Fashion changes fast in the eternal artificial day. Last month everyone was wearing uniforms, modified with patches of pressure-sensitive fabric that displayed their vital signs. Now the trend is for clothing, grown from the same bacterial colonies that process oxygen in the air filters. Your clothes literally help you breathe. The lunch period ends with the usual ritual. Everyone's leftovers go into different recycling chutes, sorted by molecular complexity. The protein will become tomorrow's lunch. The water will be filtered and restored to the system. The packaging will feed the smaller worms. Nothing is waste. Nothing is lost. The cycle continues. You watch the last drops of soup swirl in your bowl, creating tiny whirlpools that remind you of the old diagrams of solar systems in the archive. The next shift begins soon. The worms are waiting, their huge bodies moving in the depths below, processing everything, transforming it, keeping the cycle of survival spinning in the endless dark. Behind outlet 459, B, through a gap in the copper wiring where the insulation has worn thin, there is another world living in the electrical current. You discovered it during routine maintenance, when your screwdriver slipped and pierced the dimensional barrier that exists between voltage states. Through the outlet, light behaves differently. It pools like liquid, collects in corners, can be scooped up and drunk. The air carries tiny crystalline structures that chime when they touch your skin. Here physics runs backwards or sideways, or in beautiful helical patterns that make more sense than straight lines ever did. The residents are beings made of pure voltage, their bodies geometric and precise. They dance through the copper pathways in patterns that generate new forms of mathematics. Their cities are built from solidified frequencies, towers that reach through spectrums of radiation like spiral staircases through light. Nothing rots here. Nothing needs processing. The beings consume harmonics and excrete pure music. Their waste system produces colors that have never existed in our spectrum. They travel by allowing themselves to become probability waves, appearing wherever the quantum mechanics are most aesthetically pleasing. The architecture follows rules that violate every principle of bunker engineering. Buildings support themselves on pillars of crystallized time, their spires twisting through dimensions that only exist on alternate Tuesdays. The streets are paved with metamaterials that remember every footstep and reproduce them as light shows when they get bored. In their markets, they trade in abstractions, the weights of laughter, the texture of forgotten memories, the sound of plants growing in reverse. Their currency is a complex equation that changes value depending on how beautifully it's written. The poorest citizens are those who think in straight lines. The wealthy allow their thoughts to spiral in fractal patterns. Their libraries contain books that read themselves, the words lifting off pages to act out their stories in mid-air. Historical documents exist in quantum superposition, containing all possible versions of events simultaneously. Their poetry is composed in units of pure energy, each verse carefully calibrated to produce specific mutations in nearby magnetic fields. The beings speak in frequencies that make neighbors' thoughts bloom like flowers in each other's minds. Their children play games with loose electrons, teaching them to dance in perfect Fibonacci sequences. Their elderly dissolve into pure energy and become new laws of physics. You've kept this discovery secret. Sometimes, during your maintenance shifts, you reach into the socket and let your fingers dance with the current beings. They teach you to think in wavelengths, to see the spaces between electrons where entire universes can exist. You're learning their language of frequencies and phase shifts. But you always have to return to the worm levels, to the protein paste and recycled air. The socket world remains, humming behind the panel, its inhabitants living their eternal dance through copper veins and optical circuits. They've promised to teach you how to transform your body into a standing wave, if you ever decide to stay. The only trace of these visits is a slight blue glow under your fingernails, and the way nearby equipment hums in perfect harmony when you pass. Sometimes, in your sleep cycle, your dreams broadcast themselves on nearby monitors in colors that shouldn't exist in the bunker's limited spectrum. You keep a journal of the socket world, written in electromagnetic pulses, stored in a salvaged hard drive. The being showed you how to encode experience into magnetic domains, how to fold memories into the spaces between bits. Each entry ends with the same question: is their world leaking into ours, or was ours always a shadow of theirs? The worm maintenance exoskeleton creaks with each movement, its hydraulic joints powered by recycled biomatter from last week's processing. The suit runs on what the engineers call closed-loop logic. Each action feeds data back through bioelectric sensors, adjusting pressure and torque based on worm tissue resistance. The control language is ancient, developed in the first dark years. Lines of code that look like protein sequences. Worm segment. Pressure. Biomass. Constant times. Fluid ratio. If. Tissue resistance. Safety threshold. Then initiate parasympathetic response. End if. The massage sequences follow algorithms based on peristaltic rhythms. Wrong pressure at the wrong segment could trigger a cascading muscle response through 50 meters of worm tissue. The haptic feedback system translates worm muscle tension into subtle vibrations against your skin. You learn to read their bodies by touch. The heavy lifting is handled by crawler units that move on treads coated with biofilm for enhanced grip. Their propulsion systems use magnetic resonance with the metal-rich bacterial colonies that line the tunnel floors. The machines know their own weight to the microgram, constantly adjusting their load distribution to prevent structural stress on the tunnel architecture. Depth brings increased pressure. At level 85, where the largest worms dwell, the air itself has weight. The equipment compensates with compressed gas systems that match external pressure to internal systems. Gauges show the numbers in a steady climb. Atmospheric pressure, 3.7 atmospheres. Biomass density, 1.4 g over centimeters cubed. Oxygen saturation, 32%, enriched for deep level operation. The muck gets thicker as you go deeper. Its viscosity can be measured in centipoise, 1000 centi near the surface, 5000 cp at mid-levels, 15,000 cp in the deep chambers. The processors adjust their filtration matrices accordingly, using molecular sieves calibrated to different protein weights. The worm massage units operate on principles borrowed from plate tectonics. Slow, inexorable pressure applied across vast surfaces. Each pressure plate is equipped with sensors that measure surface tension of worm epidermis, subsurface muscle density, chemical gradient of metabolic byproducts, electrical conductivity of cellular membranes. The primary maintenance interface displays scrolling columns of data. Segment 37. Status: pressure gradient 0.7 kPa cm. Tissue elasticity 82%. Metabolic rate 1.6 baseline. Waste processing efficiency 94%. Peristaltic rhythm 0.3 Hz. Deep in the bottom levels, the machines speak to each other in protocols that haven't been updated since the first dark. Their programming is written in dialects of Fortran and COBOL, maintained by technicians who learned the languages from their grandparents. The oldest subroutines contain comments referring to surface conditions, to weather patterns, to seasonal changes that no longer exist. The lift assemblies groan under loads of processed biomass. Their cables are woven from carbon nanotubes and synthetic spider silk, rated for tensions that would snap steel. The pulleys operate on mathematical principles that account for the non-Euclidean geometries that sometimes manifest in the deeper chambers. The waste processing equations flow across monitors in endless streams. C6H12006 plus 6O2, 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus energy, but modified for the enhanced metabolic processes of the engineered worms C6H12O6 plus 6O2, 3CH4 plus 3CO2 plus 3H2O plus 2ATP plus biomass. The afternoon wears on. The machines pump and whir. The worms process their endless streams of matter. The monitors blink their data in steady rhythms. Everything is measured. Everything is calculated. Everything feeds back into the system's vast cycles of maintenance and survival. Your exoskeleton's power cells show 47% charge remaining. The next shift will need them at 85%. The charging algorithms factor in power draw per movement, biomechanical efficiency ratio, heat loss through hydraulic systems, capacitor degradation rate, available current from geothermal grid. Even the fatigue is measured. Biosensors in your uniform track cortisol levels, muscle strain, hydration status. The system knows when you need rest before you do. Its algorithms processing thousands of biological data points per second through medical databases written in the first dark years. The work continues, measured in pressure gradients and power cycles, in tons of processed biomass and kilowatts of expended energy. The machines hum their ancient songs of maintenance and survival, their code running in endless loops through processors that remember the surface world only as commented lines in their source code.